So Ron DeSantis has yet to officially announce he is running for president in 2024, but former President Trump clearly sees the Florida governor as, if not his biggest threat, certainly a big threat for the Republican nomination.
He keeps talking about him. During Trump's first trip to Iowa since declaring his third bid for the White House, he has intensified his attacks on DeSantis, hitting him over his record on ethanol, Social Security, and also tying him to the establishment wing of the party.
Thank you, great governor. Okay, so remember this. Ron DeSantis. Did anyone ever hear of DeSantis? The sanctimonious DeSantis. No, Ron DeSantis strongly opposed ethanol. And he also fought against Social Security. He wanted to decimate it and voted against it 3 times. Voted against Social Security. That's a bad word. But you have to remember, Ron was a disciple of Paul Ryan.
Alice Stewart is a Republican strategist and a CNN political commentator. Olivia Troye is a former advisor to Vice President Mike Pence. Welcome, both of you. So, Alice, let's start with you, because it's interesting. The New York Times reports that in response to those comments from the former president, the audience was mixed, both applause and groans. And it also comes as we have new CNN polling showing that among Republican voters, 40 of them would support Donald Trump as the Republican nominee. But look who's at a close second here, Ron DeSantis at 36%. They are the only two who came out in double digits, both Mike Pence and Nikki Haley coming in around 6%. Alice, your reaction in terms of how you think the Trump camp would respond to these figures, saying that DeSantis is tailing him closely.
Yeah, they should certainly be concerned, Bianna, because what we see in poll after poll since the former president left office, his numbers are staying virtually the same amongst the GOP, and Ron DeSantis continues to grow, and he is gaining support. And look, for someone who is not even in the race for 2024, Ron DeSantis is living rent-free in Donald Trump's head, and it's not making any impact on the favorability and popularity of Ron DeSantis. We're seeing numbers out of Iowa where Republicans in the state of Iowa say that they would be more likely to support a candidate outside of Donald Trump. That should be extremely concerning to the president. And look, what we're seeing, I spoke with evangelicals in Iowa over the weekend. Many of them say they're ready to turn the page. They want someone who espouses the policies of Donald Trump without the tone and tenor. And what we're seeing with Ron DeSantis, he has gone out in many of these states. He's talking with them, getting feedback from them, and reassuring them that he has the policies that many in the Republican Party do support. He wants to work on the economy, which is very strong in the state of Florida. He wants to focus on education and crime and safety. And he's going to do so in a way that is not as toxic as they have seen from Donald Trump.
You know, Olivia, our poll, which Bianna was talking about there, which shows Donald Trump with 40% of Republican voters, Ron DeSantis with 36, has another really interesting series of numbers there. When you look at the DeSantis versus Trump voters, those with incomes under 50% support Trump overwhelmingly, 52 to 27%. And you can see with incomes over $50,000, Ron DeSantis actually holds the lead. And education is sort of a similar thing. No college, Trump over DeSantis. College grad is DeSantis over Trump. That was interesting. I hadn't seen those splits before, and I wonder if you can marry that to what we've seen from each candidate the last few days. Trump going after DeSantis on Social Security, and DeSantis all of a sudden to Fox News saying that he does not really support the U.S. efforts to help Ukraine, calling it a territorial dispute. Explain all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild to see those numbers, I would say. And I think that just shows you the division here between the two frontrunners in the Republican Party. One of them is pandering to the base, which is Trumpism. Both of them, I think, have that appeal. I think that Trump is still kind of trying to claim that he represents the forgotten Republican, so to speak, the working class. I would say that is his bread and butter. That's the message that he used all along to get elected the first time around. And so I think DeSantis is now trying to establish himself. That was quite the entry into the foreign policy field. I have to say that as a national security person, from my perspective, it's actually horrifying to me that you have two potential frontrunners for the Republican nomination espousing pro-Putin and standing against Ukraine. I think we have fallen very far from the Reagan party, I would say. But look, I'm glad that Ron DeSantis put himself on the record on where he stands on this. It's certainly a slap to the courage of the people of Ukraine, but it's good to know that that's who he really is.
Well, Alice, let's pick up on that because that is sort of a jaw-dropping statement, and it's not a one-off. Just a few weeks ago, he said that Vladimir Putin does not pose a threat to the West, and now he's saying that the war in Ukraine is a territorial dispute. I mean, these are sort of Kremlin talking points at their best. What impact is this going to have on the party as a whole when, for the most part, in terms of leadership, Republicans are in support of Ukraine and their defense of Russia's illegal invasion?
Look, clearly DeSantis has a very nuanced position when it comes to Ukraine, and his response and follow-up on some of the criticism he's received. His team has been quite clear on he does support for Ukraine, but he wants to make sure that it's not simply a blank check, and he wants to make sure that any assistance or military equipment that we give doesn't escalate and take this fight outside of the border. So he's got a very nuanced position on that. I did want to comment on the college-educated and non-college educated support for Trump and DeSantis. What I think, again, is another concern for Donald Trump. He's going to continue to hold many of the non-college educated Republican voters. But as DeSantis continues to get out there, I do believe there's more of a chance for him to pick up the non-college educated voters than it is for Donald Trump to try and peel off some of the college-educated voters, many of which left him and left their support of him because of the way he acted while he was president, the name-calling and January 6th and election denying and conspiracy theories. So those crosstabs of the college education will be interesting to watch in the days and weeks ahead.
Well, DeSantis has yet to announce what he's going to do, and he has yet to really respond to these continued attacks from the former president. We'll see how long he can keep that up. Alice Stewart and Olivia Troye, thank you.
Thanks, Bianna.